A week ago, I made a complete pre-release analysis about Baizhu, but since then, people have been asking me specific questions about his spot in the meta, possible roles on niche teams, and other things I didn't necessarily cover in my guides, since I went through more general stuff. In this video, I try to go through some of the most asked questions I've received about him, so let's look at it together. The most debated topic I've seen is about how he compares to Nahida. I've already done a couple videos about this in the past, but one thing I haven't talked about, which also got asked, is whether or not pulling for Nahida's Constellation 2 is better than pulling for Baizhu. Pay attention, the comparison here is not between Constellation 2 Nahida and just Baizhu, but rather Constellation 2 Nahida against Baizhu and Constellation 0 Nahida. Nahida's Constellation 2 is notorious for being one of the best constellations in the game. In my opinion, it's definitely one of the best early constellations at the very least, only possibly tied by juggernauts like Raiden's Constellation 2. As a rule of thumb, Nahida's Constellation 2 is a team-wide 20% damage increase for all Dendro teams, as it manages to do that by reducing opponents' defense by 30% every time they're hit by Quicken-related reactions, and by adding a flat crit multiplier bonus to Bloom-related reactions. However, the main thing that makes this constellation so powerful is its flexibility, as you only need to mark opponents with Nahida's long-lasting elemental skill to enable these effects. As such, this constellation is one of the most consistent supportive effects in the game, if not the most consistent. Basically, for Baizhu to match this incredible effect, he has to be a 20% damage increase on Dendro team over other defensive options, so characters like Thoma, Zhongli and Yao Yao, and this simply never happens. There is one relevant scenario, which is a quickened team with 2 Electro units, where the combination of Baizhu and Kazuha can beat the combinations of Constellation 0 Nahida and somebody like Zhongli or Yao Yao by a lot, simply because of how much of an upgrade Kazuha is for these types of teams. In general, these two variants only become evenly matched when Constellation 2 Nahida is in the equation. Basically, in this scenario alone, Baizhu has a very small argument over Constellation 2 Nahida, while in all other scenarios, simply pulling for that constellation and replacing Baizhu with any defensive unit on a Dendro team will be a significant upgrade. Baizhu against Zhongli has also been a frequently asked question. In fact, Zhongli is kind of a staple on Quicken-based teams, which are teams that don't need many character slots to maintain their core identity, so they easily allow for the presence of such general use units. Specifically, Zhongli is pretty good on spread-based teams with multiple Dendro units, since Anemo characters are devalued in those scenarios. That's also the one scenario where Zhongli can be a side grade to Baizhu on Dendro teams from a damage perspective, for example on Alhaitham teams. In particular, Alhaitham triple Dendro teams with Baizhu are a side grade to double Dendro with Zhongli. In general, there is not much of a reason to run a third Dendro unit on the team if he's not also taking advantage of Quicken significantly, and that's not the case for Baizhu. Zhongli holding the tenacity of the Millelith set and providing his consistent resistance reduction effects can easily match Baiju's contribute with the Ocean Clamp set and his own supportive effects. Basically, if you're looking to pull Baizhu for this specific team, then you can keep your Zhongli there instead and spare your Primogems. This is also the case for double Dendro, double Electro Quicken teams where your other Dendro character is Nahida. For all the other types of Dendro teams, Baiju's application becomes more relevant, and as such, his offensive contribution can easily surpass Zhongli's. The third topic is about Baiju's relevance as a driver. There is this misconception that Baizhu won't be a great driver, and this is simply not true. While his application per rotation won't match Nahida's, it's more or less similar to Alhaitham's while he's on field, and I'd even argue Baiju's application is better suited for Hyperbloom or Burgeon teams in general. In fact, Alhaitham's issues for those teams is that he applies Dendro multiple times instantaneously when his mirrors hit opponents, which basically means his large application is compressed in few instances, and it ends up generating more than 2 seeds simultaneously as a result, which is bad, since any additional Hyperbloom over that is wasted damage. So, Baizhu can be relative to Alhaitham application-wise, but with better distribution over a rotation. Alhaitham compensates that with superior raw damage, so I'd say that from an offensive perspective, the two are evenly matched as Hyperbloom drivers, with Baizhu having a decisive edge from a durability perspective, for obvious reasons. Something else I've been asked is about how Baizhu would perform on burning teams, specifically meth teams, and the answer is he'd be much more restricted than Nahida in that role. In fact, not only Nahida can offer big elemental mastery support, which is huge for melt, but also her guaranteed AoE hits make burning very consistent in those scenarios, even if you don't have particularly great pyro players on the team. In fact, by having guaranteed Dendro application on all opponents every 2.5 seconds, you can sort of maintain consistent burning on at least one of them throughout a rotation. Since burning also spreads AoE on a small range, odds are that even if you lose it on one target, then other opponents will just apply pyro to others by getting close to them, which is quite valuable. On the other hand, with a single target applier who is less consistent throughout a rotation, you're much more liable to losing that pyro application with no way to reapply it again. So at the very least, Baizhu will need more consistent pyro appliers to fix that issue. Even then, Nahida has major advantages from an application perspective and also buffing perspective, so using Baizhu instead of her will feel like a huge downgrade. The last topic for today is about Baizhu's synergy with Tighnari. Briefly put, he's basically a side grade to Zhongli on this team as well. The structure of this team is similar to other double electro weekend teams, as Tighnari teams in general rely a lot on Yae and Fischl from a damage perspective, so characters like Zhongli can add a lot to the team, thanks to tenacity on millilith buffs and resistance reduction effects. These variants are not particularly below double Dendro variants with Nahida, so basically Baizhu is slightly below Nahida in the role, with additional survivability added. To go more in detail about rotations and synergy, since Tighnari teams are rather quick swap, and Baiju's buffs refresh every 2.5 seconds for the active characters on average, for most of the rotation he'll end up buffing Yae and Tighnari's entire reaction damage, with Fischl possibly also ending up receiving buffs depending on how lucky you are. So, I'm done for today. I know some of you might have even more specific questions to ask, but honestly, it's tough to answer everything through videos. Honestly, I would say I did a pretty good job at covering a wide array of things for Baizhu during this entire pre-release process, and I hope all the content you watched from me helped you decide whether or not this character is made for you. For any other questions you might have, feel free to ask them in the comment section below and I'll be happy to answer them. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!